Imagine sitting in your favorite neighborhood bar, the jukebox playing, friends laughing, drinks half full. Then the door opens, and in less than 10 minutes, for lives are erased. What if the stranger at the bar stool next to you was a killer in disguise? It was August 1st, 2025, a Friday night in Anaconda, Montana. The Owl Bar was buzzing with the usual mix of locals, construction workers winding down, couples sharing drinks, a few regulars trading jokes with the bartender. The kind of night that was ordinary, forgettable in its routine, until it wasn't. At 9:13 p.m., the man who would shatter the town forever stepped inside. He wasn't a stranger. People had seen him before. A quiet figure, a regular drinker, a veteran. He ordered without fuss, sat quietly, almost blending into the background. Nobody thought twice about him. The first shot cracked like lightning. At first, some thought it was a firecracker, a prank. But when the bartender collapsed, glass shattering around her, the room froze in disbelief. A scream tore through the silence. Then another shot and another. Chaos erupted. People dove under tables, scrambled for exits, tripped over chairs. The jukebox kept playing, absurdly cheerful, until someone yanked the cord. The air filled with the smell of gunpowder, spilled beer, blood. Survivors later said his face was blank, detached, as if he wasn't even there, as if the man pulling the trigger had already left his humanity behind. By 9:20 p.m., 4 people were dead. Dozens more were traumatized, and the gunman was gone. Police arrived minutes later, sirens cutting through the night. They found bodies, broken glass, pools of blood, but no shooter. He had vanished into the Montana dark, leaving behind only terror. The town of Anaconda was stunned. This wasn't Chicago or Los Angeles. This wasn't the kind of place where people expected to see crime scene tape fluttering in the night breeze. Anaconda was supposed to be safe. And yet, in the span of 7 minutes, that illusion was shattered. As investigators combed the bar for shell casings and witnesses were led away, trembling, one question hung heavy in the air. Who could do this? The answer, when it came, was even more unsettling. He wasn't a stranger from out of town. He wasn't a drifter passing through. He was one of their own. They called him a soldier, a veteran, a man who had once served his country. But behind the uniform, behind the polite nods to neighbors and the quiet routines of small-town life, was someone unraveling. To understand what happened inside the Owl Bar, we have to go back. Not just to that night, but to the life that shaped the man who pulled the trigger. He wasn't born a monster. Nobody ever is. He grew up in Montana, the kind of childhood marked by long winters, hunting trips with his father, and the silent rhythm of rural life. In school, he was described as shy but polite, not a troublemaker. He graduated, enlisted in the Army, and left Anaconda to serve a country that would later question what it had given back to him. Military life hardened him. He was deployed overseas, where he saw things no one should have to see. The battlefield carved something into him. Discipline, yes, but also scars that ran deep inside his mind. A friend from his unit said, he came back different. The man who had left Anaconda smiling in a family photo returned home quieter, colder, distant. Some nights, neighbors said, he could be heard shouting in his sleep, as if he were still in the desert, still under fire. Like many veterans, he struggled to adjust. The uniform was gone, the mission over, but the war never really ended for him. The VA records showed he had sought help for anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. Medications came and went. Therapy sessions started and stopped. He told people he was fine, but his eyes told a different story. At times, he seemed on edge. Other times, almost numb. In a town as small as Anaconda, people noticed, but they didn't ask questions. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was discomfort. Maybe it was just the way small towns work. Everyone knows, but nobody says. The truth is, there were warning signs. A bar fight here. A burst of anger there. His drinking grew heavier. He lost jobs, struggled with relationships, withdrew into himself. To some, he was just another veteran battling demons. To others, he was a man best avoided. But nobody thought he was capable of mass murder. Nobody thought the same man who once served under the American flag would one day terrorize his own neighbors. His family, what was left of it, saw the changes more clearly. He distanced himself from them, turning phone calls into brief conversations, visits into rare occasions. When he did speak, he talked about betrayal, how the government abandoned him, how the system failed him, how the people around him didn't understand. The bitterness grew year by year, feeding something dark inside him. On the outside, though, he blended in. He drove an old truck. He bought groceries at the local store. He nodded at people on the street. If you passed him on the sidewalk, you might not even notice him. But inside, his thoughts were unraveling, circling darker and darker places. By 2025, the isolation had consumed him. He had stopped holding down steady work. His drinking worsened. His social circle had shrunk to almost nothing. And then came the final straw, something that investigators would later uncover as a trigger. Some say it was a financial crisis. Others say it was a failed relationship. Maybe both. Whatever it was, it pushed him past the edge. In the weeks leading up to August 1st, he became unpredictable. Neighbors noticed him pacing at night, headlights from his truck flickering down the street at odd hours. At the gas station, he bought beer and cigarettes but avoided eye contact. His shoulders hunched, his jaw clenched. One clerk recalled how his hands trembled as he counted out change. Another remembered how he muttered something about being forgotten. He visited the Owl Bar in the days before the massacre, sat alone, ordered quietly, watched people. He wasn't looking for friends. He was studying the room, like a soldier surveying terrain. The bartender smiled at him, tried to start a conversation, but he only gave short replies. Nobody could have guessed she would be his first victim. What makes this story chilling isn't just the violence, but how close the town came to noticing the storm before it broke. The signs were there, the withdrawal, the anger, the loneliness, the erratic behavior. But in a place like Anaconda, where everyone has struggles, it's easy to mistake a breaking point for just another bad week. When investigators dug through his past after the arrest, they pieced together a portrait of a man living on the edge. His Army records revealed a commendation for bravery, but also notes about disciplinary issues and mental health concerns. His medical files showed missed appointments, unfinished treatments, medications abandoned after side effects. His phone contained searches for mass shootings, weapons, and veterans who had killed themselves or others. It was a disturbing pattern, a life spiraling, a mind cracking, a tragedy waiting to happen. And yet, nobody stopped it. Nobody intervened. Nobody saw how close he was to erupting. On August 1st, when he climbed into his truck and drove to the Owl Bar, it wasn't a sudden decision. It was the result of years of pain, isolation, and bitterness boiling over. He parked outside, staring at the neon glow, the laughter spilling into the night. For him, it wasn't just a bar. It was a symbol of the community he felt abandoned by, a symbol of the life he believed he no longer belonged to. He sat there with the engine off, gun by his side, as if making peace with the decision. Some survivors later said they believed he was already gone before he fired a single shot, not gone in body, but gone in spirit, hollowed out by everything that had brought him to that point. When police finally arrested him a week later, they expected rage, defiance, maybe even violence. What they found instead was silence. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He just sat there, hands cupped behind his back, staring straight ahead as though nothing mattered anymore. That silence spoke louder than words. To some, it was proof of guilt. To others, it was a sign of a broken man, detached from the horror he caused. To the families of the victims, it was unbearable, a refusal to give answers, to explain why he had taken their loved ones away. But before his silence became the focus of the trial, before the nation debated whether he was a monster or a man destroyed by war, the town of Anaconda lived through something just as chilling as the massacre itself. The week that followed the shooting was not just about grief. It was about terror, because for 7 days, the killer was free, and nobody knew where he would strike next. The Owl Bar shooting had ended in minutes, but the nightmare for Anaconda was just beginning. For people were dead, the community was shattered, and the man responsible had vanished into the night. By midnight, the streets were locked down. Police cruisers patrolled neighborhoods with spotlights sweeping across porches and alleyways. Helicopters circled overhead. Families huddled inside their homes with doors bolted and lights off, whispering prayers that he wouldn't come for them next, because nobody knew where he was. That uncertainty was the cruelest weapon of all. Every rumor became a warning. Every creak in the night felt like danger at the door. People said they saw his truck parked near the old smelter site. Others swore he was hiding in the mountains, armed and waiting. Some claimed he had already skipped town, heading for Idaho or Canada. Nobody knew for sure, and that not knowing turned the entire town into a pressure cooker of fear. Parents kept their kids home from school. Shopkeepers closed early. The streets of Anaconda, usually humming with summer traffic, became eerily quiet. It was as though life itself had been put on pause, the whole town holding its breath. Investigators worked around the clock. They interviewed survivors, gathered security footage, traced the gunman's last known steps. The FBI joined in alongside state troopers and local deputies. Still, for days, he slipped through their grasp. One detail made everything worse. He was trained. This wasn't just a random shooter. This was a veteran who knew how to disappear, how to survive, how to hide. He had spent years in combat zones, blending into hostile terrain. Compared to the deserts of Iraq or Afghanistan, the Montana wilderness was practically home turf. Law enforcement worried he was hunting them. Roadblocks went up. Officers wore vests and carried rifles, knowing that if he chose to ambush, they'd be outgunned. It wasn't just a manhunt. It was a chess game, and every move carried the possibility of more bloodshed. For the townspeople, the tension was unbearable. One resident recalled how she jumped every time a car backfired. Another described walking into her kitchen at night and freezing at the sight of her own reflection in the window, thinking for a split second that he was outside. Guns flew off shelves at the local sporting goods store. People who had never owned weapons before suddenly armed themselves, desperate for a sense of control. The funerals came quickly, held under heavy police presence. Families wept as caskets were lowered into ground, the sound of crying echoing through the cemetery. It wasn't just grief, it was anger. How could this man, someone they knew, someone who once wore the American flag on his uniform, turn his rifle on them? And why had anyone stopped him before it came to this? Behind the scenes, detectives pieced together his trail. They discovered he had stocked up on supplies before the attack, canned food, water, ammunition. He had withdrawn cash from an ATM days earlier, as if preparing to disappear. They found a map in his truck, marked with circles around remote areas of the Montana backcountry. He had planned for this. But there was something else that stood out. He hadn't run far. In fact, in those 7 days, he stayed close. Too close. Authorities realized he was still in Anaconda, hiding in plain sight among the very people he had terrorized. The realization shook the town. It meant that while families were locking their doors, while children cried themselves to sleep, while vigils were held for the dead, the killer might have been watching from a distance, maybe even walking past them in the grocery store, hidden under a baseball cap, his face blending into the crowd. On the 5th day, a break finally came. A local spotted an abandoned cabin outside of town. Doors ajar, smoke faintly rising from a chimney. When deputies checked it, they found signs of recent occupation. Empty cans, cigarette butts, a cot that was still warm. He had been there, maybe even hours before. The chase tightened. Law enforcement flooded the area, combing through woods, searching abandoned buildings, setting up roadblocks on every possible exit. Yet, somehow, he slipped away again. It was as if he knew every move before they made it. Some officers admitted privately that it felt like hunting a ghost. By now, national media had swarmed the town. News vans lined the streets. Satellite dishes rose like steel flowers. Reporters broadcast live updates on the courthouse steps, their voices carrying grim urgency. The Anaconda government remained at large. Anchors speculated on motives, mental health, gun laws, veteran struggles. Overnight, this small Montana town had become the epicenter of America's latest tragedy. But for the people living there, it wasn't politics. It was survival. Every night, they asked themselves the same question. Would he strike again? The fear peaked on the 7th day. A rumor spread that he had been spotted near the high school. Police rushed in, guns drawn, students evacuated in a flood of panic. But it was a false alarm. Still, it left scars. Parents clutched their children tighter. Teachers confessed they had started carrying makeshift weapons in their classrooms, just in case. That same evening, the sheriff called a press conference. His voice shook as he addressed the town. "We will find him. We will bring him to justice. But I'm asking you all, stay vigilant. Lock your doors. If you see something, say something. We cannot let fear win." But fear had already won. Anaconda was a community on edge, its spirit cracked by the knowledge that danger wasn't just out there. It was homegrown. We're in the face of someone they once trusted. And then, finally, the silence broke. On the 8th day, officers found him, not hiding in the mountains, not fleeing across state lines, but sitting in his truck at the edge of town, engine off, staring out at the horizon as if he had been waiting for them. When the SWAT team moved in, rifles trained, he didn't resist. He didn't speak. He didn't even blink. He just let them cuff him, his face as blank as the night of the shooting. For the people of Anaconda, the capture brought relief, but not peace, because now came the harder questions. Why had he done it? What had snapped inside him? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, could it have been prevented? The answers lay in his past. Answers that prosecutors, psychiatrists, and grieving families would spend months untangling. But as the trial loomed, one thing became clear. The massacre at the Owl Bar was not just about one man's descent into violence. It was about the cracks in the system that allowed him to fall through. And in the courtroom, under the gaze of victims' families and the nation watching on television, those cracks would be laid bare. The trial of the Anaconda gunman wasn't just about determining guilt. That part was obvious. He had walked into a crowded bar, opened fire, and left 4 people dead. Witnesses had seen him. Shell casings matched his weapon. Surveillance cameras had caught his truck leaving the scene. The evidence was overwhelming. No, this trial was about something deeper. Why? Why a man who had once sworn to protect his country turned his rifle on his neighbors? Why warning signs had been ignored? Why the system had failed to stop him before lives were lost? From the moment the proceedings began, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every seat. Victims' families sat in the front rows, clutching photographs of the people they had lost. The air was thick with anger, grief, and the unbearable weight of unfinished lives. When he entered in his orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles, the room went silent. He didn't look at the families. He didn't look at the cameras. He just stared straight ahead, expressionless, as though none of it mattered. The prosecution opened with fire. "Ladies and gentlemen," the district attorney said, his voice sharp, "this man executed for innocent people. He planned it. He prepared for it. And he carried it out without mercy. You will see that he is not just guilty, he is dangerous, calculated, and unrepentant." The defense, however, painted a different picture. They didn't deny what he had done. Instead, they argued why he had done it. They spoke of his service, his deployments, the trauma he carried home. They described a man eaten alive by post-traumatic stress, abandoned by the system, spiraling without support until violence consumed him. "This case," his lawyer said, "is about a soldier who came home broken and was left to drown in silence. The tragedy is not only in what happened inside that bar, but in everything that led him there." The tension was immediate. Was he a cold-blooded killer? Or a shattered veteran failed by the institutions meant to protect him? Witnesses brought the story into sharp focus. Survivors of the shooting took the stand, their voices trembling as they relived that night. One woman described ducking under a table, clutching her friend's hand as bullets ripped through the air. Another man, shot in the leg, recalled crawling toward the exit while the jukebox played on. Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of chaos and terror, forcing everyone in the courtroom to imagine the fear inside the Owl Bar. Then came the families. Mothers, fathers, siblings, children. They spoke of birthdays that would never be celebrated, of empty chairs at the dinner table, of lives stolen in an instant. A daughter of one victim stared directly at the gunman as she spoke. "You didn't just kill my father. You killed our family. You killed our sense of safety. You killed the future we thought we had." For the first time, his eyes flickered. Just a blink, a tightening of the jaw. Some wondered if it was guilt. Others thought it was rage. Whatever it was fleeting. Moments later, he was stoned again. But it wasn't just the survivors and families. Experts were called to testify. Psychiatrists explained the effects of untreated trauma, describing how PTSD can twist the mind, turning memories into nightmares and everyday life into a battlefield. One doctor read from his VA records, detailing years of inconsistent treatment, missed medications, and warnings that went unheeded. He was a ticking time bomb, the psychiatrist said. And the tragedy is, it could have been defused. Prosecutors pushed back hard. They acknowledged his struggles, but argued that millions of veterans face similar demons without turning to murder. They showed evidence of planning. The cash withdrawals, the supply stockpiles, the maps. They reminded the jury that he had chosen his target, chosen his weapon, chosen his moment. This wasn't a breakdown. The prosecutor thundered. This was a choice. And choices have consequences. The defense countered with stories from his past. Friends and former comrades took the stand, describing the man they once knew, a soldier who saved lives overseas, who once smiled easily, who wrote letters home full of hope. They spoke of how he changed after deployment, how alcohol became his medicine, how anger replaced joy. One former platoon mate choked up as he said, "He came home, but he never really came back. We lost him over there. The bar was just where it finally showed." The courtroom became a battlefield of its own, between justice and compassion, accountability and understanding. The media fed on the tension, turning it into a national debate. Some headlines painted him as a monster. Others called him a tragic warning of what happens when veterans fall through cracks. Through it all, he sat silent. No outbursts, no apologies, no explanations. Just silence. Until the day he took the stand. It was a moment everyone had been waiting for. Would he speak? Would he show remorse? Would he reveal why? When he rose, shackles clinking, the room leaned forward. His lawyer asked the first question softly. "Why did you do it?" For a long time, he said nothing. The silence stretched so long that some wondered if he would refuse to answer at all. Then finally, his voice emerged, low, hoarse, almost broken. "They forgot me," he said. 3 words. That was all. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even shouts in the gallery. The judge banged the gavel, demanding order. But the damage was done. Those words echoed like gunshots themselves. They forgot me. For the families, it was an insult. A man who had stolen their loved ones daring to frame himself as a victim. For others, it was heartbreaking. A glimpse into the hollow shell of someone who had once served proudly, now consumed by bitterness and despair. When cross-examined, he shut down again. No elaboration, no apology, just silence. The jury was left with 2 truths. He had killed 4 people, and he was a man drowning in his own darkness. How they would weigh those truths was the question that lingered as the trial moved toward its climax. And the climax would come not from evidence, not from lawyers, but from the rawest form of human expression. The words of the victims' families, standing face to face with a man who had taken everything from them. The final days of the trial belonged to the families. One by one, they walked to the stand, carrying grief heavier than any juror could imagine. Their voices trembled, broke, but did not waver. They wanted him to hear them. They wanted the world to hear them. A mother held up a framed picture of her son, a bartender who had been saving money to start his own business. "You didn't just take my child," she said, glaring at the defendant. "You took every dream he had. You took the grandchildren I'll never hold. You took the light out of our lives. And for what? Because you were angry? Because you were hurting? My son didn't deserve to pay for your pain." A brother of another victim leaned forward, voice shaking with rage. "You wanted attention? You wanted the world to notice you? Well, congratulations. They do. But when they remember you, it won't be as a soldier. It won't be as a man. It will be as a coward who gunned down innocent people." Some testimonies were filled with fury, others with sorrow. A widow whispered through tears about lying awake in an empty bed. A child, barely old enough to understand, asked why their father wasn't coming home. Each word cut through the courtroom, each sentence adding weight to the silence of the man in the orange jumpsuit. He never looked up, never flinched. Some families said that hurt more than the bullets. The emotional peak came with the last testimony. A young woman, daughter of one of the victims, stood trembling but determined. She held her father's hat in her hands, gripping it as though it anchored her to the earth. "My dad believed in people," she said softly. "He believed in kindness, in second chances. If he were here, I think he would want me to forgive you. But I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because you didn't just kill him. You killed the man who believed in me. And now I have to live the rest of my life wondering what he would say on my wedding day. Or when I have children, or when I need advice. You stole all of that, and there's no forgiveness for that." The room was silent, save for the sound of muffled sobs. Even the judge looked away, his face heavy with the burden of hearing too much sorrow in too little time. When the testimonies ended, the jury withdrew. Hours stretched into a day. Reporters camped outside, speculating. Families waited in a holding room, nerves frayed. And the man at the center of it all sat motionless, staring at the wall. Finally, the jury returned. The foreman stood, voice steady. "We find defendant guilty on all counts." There was no gasp, no outburst, just a wave of quiet relief, as though the town itself had been holding its breath for weeks and could finally exhale. The sentencing came swiftly. Life in prison without parole. The judge's words were sharp, unyielding. You chose to end lives that were not yours to take. You chose violence. And for that, you will spend the rest of your life behind bars. May the silence you sit in now follow you to the end of your days. As the guards led him away, shackles clinking, he gave no reaction, no words, no apology, just the same blank stare he had worn from the moment of his arrest. For Anaconda, closure was complicated. The killer was gone, locked away. Justice, in the legal sense, had been served. But no sentence could restore what was lost. The bar stood empty, its jukebox unplugged, its chairs stacked against the wall. For months, flowers and photos covered the sidewalk outside, a shrine to the lives stolen inside. The town tried to heal. Support groups formed. Vigils were held. Murals were painted in honor of the victims. And slowly, laughter began to return to Anaconda's streets. But the shadow of August first lingered. Parents still hesitated before letting children walk alone. Neighbors still glanced twice at strangers. And every time a door swung open in a bar or cafe, hearts skipped a beat. Nationally, the story sparked debates. Commentators argued over gun laws, veteran care, mental health funding. Politicians gave speeches. Advocates demanded reform. But in Anaconda, the questions weren't political. They were personal. How could we have missed the signs? Could we have stopped him? Did we fail our own? No answer was enough. No explanation made sense of the senseless. And so, in the end, the story of the Owl Bar Massacre wasn't just about one man's descent into darkness. It was about the fragility of safety, the cracks in the system, and the resilience of a town that refused to be defined by tragedy. Every August 1st, candles now line the street outside the bar. Names are read aloud. Tears fall. And silence lingers, a silence that says both we remember and we will not forget. As the man in the prison cell, he remains as he was in the courtroom. Silent. No letters. No interviews. No explanations. Just silence. And maybe that silence is the truest ending, because there are no words that could ever fill the void left behind.